What have I seen that has really made me happy? The conversations we are having on women empowerment, the work we are doing on women empowerment. When we look at it these days, it may seem as if it has always been there, but we are coming from very far. SheTrades being launched in Zambia in 2017 with 600 participants attending, to me was a personal success, but much of this goes to the teamwork that was done by the ITC team. Every day, if you make a change and you're giving somebody the power to be able to make decisions about their own lives because they have a constant income coming in that they can count on, that's what we should be about. I did have some of my colleagues coming at break time and say, "Oh, you're a strong woman. You're a strong woman because you can argue against men." And you're not listening to what it is that I'm providing. The irony of all this is that after a number of negotiations, we decided to use another strategy, which was to bring in exactly the same concept. And many people didn't even notice that we hadn't changed much of the wording that we had in the proposal. We asked one of our other delegations that was led by a male to present this, and it went through. One was this aspect that I explained earlier. Just being a woman was not so easy for me to be able to assert myself and be able to be considered at the same level. And once I'm retired, my idea is to go back home and draw on the numerous experience I've gathered over the years to contribute to my country in a very informal way, not in the formal structures, because I think I'll be too advanced in age for that.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Geneva Trade Insights. My name is Joanna Okitoy-Heisig and I'm the Communications Officer at the Geneva Trade Platform. And today we have the privilege of speaking with Dorothy Tembo, the Deputy Executive Director of the International Trade Center in Geneva. She is an exceptional and exemplary international civil servant, and we at the Geneva Trade Platform wanted to share her story, her perspectives, and her insights. Dorothy, it's a real pleasure to have you today with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Dorothy, you moved to Geneva about 15 years ago. What do you remember about your childhood in Zambia, and how would you describe those experiences shaping the work that you do today?
Wow, you just made me realize how long I've been in Geneva. Time does fly. But a very important point you raised there, that I am the seventh child of 8 children, 2 girls and 6 boys. So it was mainly a house of household boys. And in a way, much of what I was doing when I was coming up was on the tomboy side by virtue of having 6 brothers around myself. But it was also what I recall as being a very happy period of my time. Large extended family and a large community around us, which I think set the foundation for me to see the significance of what being part of a community and everybody, very much acknowledging that these are our children, these are the principles that we apply to everybody, was an aspect that I very much valued as I now have progressed in life. But I also should mention that I had 2 parents that put a lot of emphasis on education, and being very thankful for that. Education was the only way one could really have assurances on their career progression. That is a principle that I have taken throughout my life. Growing up in Lusaka, going to school in Lusaka, finishing my initial education in Lusaka, I was very focused on ensuring that I did my best to place myself in a position where I could advance my career by making sure that I had the tools that my parents had been talking about. And that was the beginning of my advancement in the many things that I have done in life.
So you mentioned the pivotal role that your parents had in terms of making sure that you all go through formal education, you go to university. What about your choice to get into trade? How much of that was motivated or influenced by your parents, or were there other factors that came into play?
I think a number of other factors came into play. Yeah. One has to take into context the period that I was getting into school and graduating. Essentially, when I started my education, we were just coming out of a colonial era into liberation, with government providing free education for all, of course, with the intent that they make sure that as many as possible can access education and advance their dreams. We are coming out of that period into a new administration, putting a lot of emphasis on what then was seen as important jobs. Mm-hmm. You were either a teacher, a lawyer, an economist, and none of these other evolving opportunities that we have these days. I wasn't really thinking about trade per se, but I knew from the beginning that what I wanted to do would have people at the center of all that, mm-hmm. and mostly people that were perhaps less privileged than myself, in the sense that I was looking at maybe I could be a lawyer to help people that don't have resources take forward any cases that they may have. The other option was for me to look at the possibility of becoming an economist, which is really what I decided. So I wasn't very specific in terms of focusing it on the trade lens until I started working. Mm-hmm. My first job was with the National Commission for Development Planning in Zambia, mm-hmm. and I was responsible for the capital expenditure. It entailed looking more at not the recurrent expenditure such as the usual operational resources that were required for the different ministries, but at projects, long-term projects that were supporting people mostly in rural areas. Mm-hmm. That opened my mind to have a closer understanding of the need pertaining particularly to those that were not as privileged as we were at the time. Mm-hmm. It shifted my focus to say whatever I do within this sphere would have to be one that addresses itself to making sure that I'm able to contribute. Mm-hmm. It was from that view that I started trying to shift and specialize a bit more on the trade side. But I thought getting into trade, I needed to understand a little bit better about private sector operations. And therefore, I moved from the Planning Commission into private sector to work for a commercial bank. Mm-hmm. From there, I joined Ministry of Trade in Zambia, bringing me squarely into the trade and development arena.
I find it very interesting, your perspective about having this desire to work with those who might not have access to a lot of other opportunities. And particularly in this setting, in this international Geneva, where most of the time the typical image of a development practitioner is not necessarily seen as a Black woman. If anything, the Black woman is often viewed as the recipient. But in this case, you're shifting this narrative because we can already see that is ingrained in you. I'm curious, thinking about your move from the ministry to international development organizations, what was motivating that transition?
A very important question. I see perhaps there was one underlying issue that was driving me at the point. I think it's really me wanting to be a part of those that make the change happen. This issue was not only confined to the international arena. It was an issue addressing how society looked at women at the time that I was growing up, in a cultural background where at the time, for many people, the girls were not being given equal opportunity as I would have wanted it to be. We were an exception in the sense that we had two parents that had gone through education, saw the value of that, and therefore were giving all their children without exception that opportunity to equip them with the possibility of better defining their future. At the time, if you have resources, that investment will be in the boy child. And therefore, you see this filtering through even in terms of how we were operating as government officials. Yes, there were a number of girls working, but because it's instilled within you from a cultural perspective, some of the menfolk that we worked with were very clear. Oh, you can work here, but promotion might be difficult because you have the responsibility to look after your family, children, and that's where you should be spending the time. So you want to start changing that perspective from that time. Even the way you dressed going to work was predetermined on the assumptions made by those making the decisions. I recall a time when the ladies were up in arms saying, why would you tell me not to wear trousers if I want to wear trousers? Because it was not taken as a given. This was considered not to be formal dressing for a woman. So you're starting from such perspectives that even in your own country, you have to make sure you are there trying to push a message that signals that you are all equal, maybe even better. I thought this is one side of what I had to deal with, but I also had a strategy to say, this is the message that I can also take beyond the border of Zambia to show my colleagues in the region and indeed at the international level that women can do it. Women can do it and do it even better. But more importantly is the fact that I'm coming from a less developed country. I live this experience every day, and I will be the one to come and explain what the issues are together with the others. This is all a team effort. But this is how I saw it. I did recognize the challenges that came with this. I recall going to one important meeting when I was chief trade negotiator for Zambia, and we were entering into a very complex relationship with one of the key providers of development assistance. Prior to that, we had a non-reciprocal arrangement, but we were getting into a reciprocal arrangement, which demanded conversations, negotiations around very technical issues, which perhaps would not have been accommodated by a structure that was mainly constituted by political appointees at the time. I mean, it's the prerogative of the heads of state to do this, but whether this person has the ability to negotiate such is something else. The idea we were presenting as Zambia, as some of the regions who were also in agreement with that, was good. But because I presented it, I did have some of my colleagues coming at break time and say, oh, you're a strong woman. You're a strong woman because you can argue against men. And you're not listening to what it is that I'm providing. The irony of all this is that after a number of negotiations, we decided to use another strategy, which was to bring in exactly the same concept. And many people didn't even notice that we hadn't changed much of the wording that we had in the proposal. We asked one of our other delegations that was led by a male to present this, and it went through.
Oh.
It went through. So I always give that as an example, but it just illustrates what it is that we have had to go through over the years. But I must be the first to admit that I now see many women participating in negotiations, being listened to, but there's still scope for additional improvement.
Looking at your childhood, being a girl who's growing up amongst so many boys, sort of being primed to take on these challenges with this sense of unapologetic presence and boldness as well, watching that energy also coming into the work and into your career. We're seeing that. You came into Geneva and started off at the WTO. Can you give us a snapshot of what you did at the WTO and how you transitioned into the ITC?
I can take you a little bit back in responding to that question in the sense that once I had clarity that I wanted to be in the trade arena, I started thinking about what exactly did I want to do in the trade space. My start was with the Ministry of Trade back home, but I knew that for me to not only grow from a career perspective, but more importantly, to be able to provide the level of support that I was looking towards in relation to supporting those countries that are less privileged than the others was one that could not be fully achieved by just remaining in the national space. Mm-hmm. I knew from the word go that I needed to have a clear plan in terms of how I wanted to progress this. So, Ministry of Trade first, and then I moved forward to support the region. And I was on a project supporting the SADC trade protocol negotiations in Southern Africa. By then had progressed, but we're still very much a space that needed additional support to come in. So I moved to that. From there, I knew that I would have to think of the next step. And mine was, I have the national experience, I have the regional experience. I need to build by looking at opportunities that would enable me to go beyond that. That's how I got the opportunity to join the World Trade Organization, where I was leading a technical assistance program that was specific for least developed countries. At that time, we had 50 countries that were beneficiaries to a 250 million program. This program was very specific. It was about ensuring that alongside the Aid for Trade conversations, we were supporting countries, putting in place the appropriate policies that would support them in terms of getting benefits from aid. But we also knew that for many countries, the challenge was always the institutional side of things. Mm-hmm. They didn't have the right structures in place to coordinate their efforts at the country level, but coordinate them in a way that was also sustainable or progressively looking at integrating these structures into the national planning and programming processes. The second element of what we were doing was supporting the establishment of the national implementation institutions. I did this for 5 years. By the time I was leaving, the majority of all the countries had national implementation units in place, which had staff that were supporting countries to think of trade and ensuring that this is all integrated into what they're doing as part of their development plans. Of course, the realization or the degree of that integration varies, and it's not an easy task. But what's important from my perspective is that you see a progression or a positive integration of all the elements as countries are planning.
Yeah, so a very incremental process. What was it like getting jobs? Getting a job with the World Trade Organization back then, and thinking about that recent graduate in Zambia who has just gotten the Ministry of Commerce, and for them reflecting on what is the trajectory here. Maybe they're thinking, I need to get into the WTO. What is the value that you would tell this young person who's just starting off at the Ministry of Commerce in Zambia, of them starting at that point, having big dreams? This is a long question. First part is, what was it like getting a job back then in an international organization? And then, a few words also of encouragement to that Zambian or African person who's starting at the national level.
I think the opportunities that we had then were not as big as the opportunities that are available right now. I absolutely believe that Africa or a Zambian person in a position to apply for a job, that they can do this, and in many ways they can have the opportunity or possibility of getting that job. During my time, what also helped was the fact that Zambia had taken on board a number of responsibilities in supporting the different negotiations that were going on. For Geneva in particular, we were coordinating the least developed countries leading to the WTO Hong Kong Ministerial in 2005. So that helped me in terms of understanding the landscape, the demands of the job I was applying to, and how perhaps I could also get to that. But it also gave me the opportunity to develop a lot of networks, to see who could be my mentor. I think you will never get these answers completely out of the formal channels. So the interactions, listening attentively when people are talking, or indeed trying to understand what is at play in terms of the political diplomacy attached to this also helped. To a young person, Zambian or beyond, I would say, first and foremost, one has to have clarity in terms of what it is that they desire to do in life, career-wise. Once you have that clarity, you have to accompany it with passion. If you're not passionate about what you're doing, it's not going to happen. Third, believe in yourself. You can do this. If you believe in yourself, nobody can stop you. Go out there and get it. And it will be there if you accompany this with all the elements that I have identified. I have no doubt in my mind that at present, Africa has more than one could count in terms of young people that are very equipped with the type of experience or knowledge that we have young Africans that are very innovative, can actually even do things outside the formal setting. I think coming to the WTO will be one thing, but I think there are many other things that they can also do that perhaps can get them even in a better place than an international organization. Go for your dream and try to do as much as you can in terms of network, get mentors. I had that. I am a mentor now, where young people will come, we sit, they will ask what it is that they need to do, how they can improve themselves. We have, as Zambians, working in the international organizations, have set up a group that provides mentorship to young Zambians to help them understand what do international organizations demand for you to be well prepared when the opportunities arise.
And is this a network that is concentrated in Geneva, or is it also just for diaspora, Zambians in the diaspora?
Zambians in the diaspora, everywhere. This is a bit of a giving back to our society, our community. We will, with people contributing as part of their free time, we will do some lectures to explain what the UN is about, the opportunities available, direct them to the right source of information. We just do whatever we can.
Yeah.
Understanding that, the UN does have a competitive process to follow. So you're giving them ideas in terms of how they can get to that objective.
I'd like us to dig a little bit deeper on this subject of also following your passion and believing in yourself. Can you give us 2 examples that you would consider as successful moments in your career so far in trade, and why would you consider these successful?
Absolutely. I'll tell you, the first thing, I was saying I had clarity in terms of my career progression. I did the policy side with my government. I moved to the region to support the regional effort. I moved to the global side of things, working with the WTO, and there, as I said, institutional and on the policy side again. But I think the best thing that I've ever done is the step that I took to join ITC. Why do I say this? ITC's work is one that is directly working with countries on the ground, with very much a private sector lens. What satisfaction has that given me? To see daily the impact that our projects or programs are having on the ground is really something that I have cherished and will continue to cherish as I move forward. At some point I will have to hang my gloves, but I will always remember this. This has been amazing for me. And to be a part of this success has been something that I really, really have appreciated, being one of the contributors to that work. What have I seen that has really made me happy? The conversations we're having on women empowerment, the work we're doing on women empowerment. When we look at it these days, it may seem as if it has always been there, but we are coming from very far. For ITC, to actually move forward and put in place the SheTrades initiative, purely focused on trying to see how women can be supported. An initiative that ITC led together with others to make sure that there is a Buenos Aires declaration made in relation to gender during the Buenos Aires WTO ministerial meeting is a huge achievement. Many a times when this issue was brought up earlier within the WTO, it was something that was said by some countries, no, this is not the right place, take it out. To see that actually being brought squarely into the conversations and additional steps being taken. Huge. At a personal level, SheTrades being launched in Zambia in 2017 with 600 participants attending, to me was a personal success, but much of this goes to the teamwork that was done by the ITC team. Recently, I went with Director General Ngozi to Nigeria, Abuja, where we met some of the SheTrades women in action. We were there 2-3 years ago, and you see how things have shifted, people producing products, ready for the market, some already in the market. That is what makes you happy. Every day, if you make a change and you're giving somebody the power to be able to make decisions about their own lives because they have a constant income coming in that they can count on, that's what we should be about.
Giving that affirmation that they have the personal agency to actually make decisions about their lives. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about workplace challenges, because this conversation would be incomplete without that. Again, what would you say are 2 key challenges you've experienced at work, and how did you bounce back from them?
One was this aspect that I explained earlier. Just being a woman was not so easy for me to be able to assert myself and be able to be considered at the same level. And I think progressively that has been addressed. I think the UN and the multicultural context has somewhat helped to sort of clarify that issue. We have rules and guidelines that ensure that everybody should be seen to be equal and treated as such. But also the overall context has really changed. It gives that possibility for women to be able to express themselves, and I don't think any member of staff here looks at me from a perspective of a woman when I provide any guidance or when we are working together. So perhaps that over the years has been overcome both by the personal effort that I've been making to try and assert myself in different, but here it's more of a context that has been very enabling for me to come through. The second challenge has been, wouldn't see it so much as a challenge, because through it I see the opportunities that are there. The overall context that ITC has been working in has changed over the years, both from a point of demand or needs of the countries that we work with. Secondly, from the point of resources being provided and how these resources would be administered. But thirdly, from how we would respond, particularly during the time that we had COVID-19 prevailing. Nobody ever imagined what this would mean, because immediately we were confronted with an issue of trying to think through how best can we respond in a situation where staff are not able to travel, to have that direct interaction which we had used as the modality for imparting the technical assistance that we were providing. You suddenly say, so what do? We were then put in a situation where we had to think outside the box, because the way of doing business changed at that moment and continues to change now. But at the same time, as I said, it was a challenge, and I'm so glad that we went over that challenge and were able to reposition ourselves and still remain relevant in that context. But it has also given us time to reflect and see how we can better do things. Already you are looking at a situation where you can use the virtual process as one way of interacting with countries, recognizing that you still have a need for that face-to-face engagement on certain aspects to give the hand-holding that we need to provide. But it has also given us the opportunity to start reflecting on issues relating to sustainability, which were not at the forefront of what we were doing, issues relating to how best we can facilitate business through the digital channels, which is also something that is particularly important. Progressively, issues relating to youth, issues relating to women, as I said, which form the fundamentals of what ITC's priorities really are at this point in time. So challenging, but has also created opportunities for the organization to better discharge its mandate.
Thinking about also these challenges you've mentioned, what do you think people working in general in international trade need to understand about change, change in the countries or the communities that they're working with?
I think the first point, being one that comes from one of these countries, sometimes we have instances perhaps where we do not recognize that issues are changing. Issues and people are changing. I would tell you why I come to people. If I look at when I was with the Ministry of Trade, much of the conversations with those providing technical assistance was around not knowing what to do. And therefore, it was very important at the time to make sure that all countries were understanding their context. You needed to do some research, some analysis, and from that you sort of identify some of the next steps that would have to happen. But you were also doing this in the context of perhaps a very limited capacity in relation to expertise at the country level. This has been 20 years plus. Sometimes we forget and we tend to provide a one-size-fits-all. And I say we, I don't mean ITC. I mean just generally how we provide the support. Sometimes we are not so strong in terms of ensuring that we impart this capacity in a sustainable way that is entrenched in the expertise on the ground. So I think more has to be done if really we are seeking to be sustainable in terms of our approach, the results that we have on the ground, and of course the accompanying impact. These are some of the aspects that we need to look at critically. We also need to ensure that what we are proposing in terms of solutions are aspects that can be absorbed by those that we are providing solutions to. Countries are at different levels of development and perhaps different levels of capabilities, and we need to make sure that it's not a one-size-fits-all. We've got to make sure that those that we are serving have a voice in terms of not only trying to enable us to better understand what it is, but to also be a part of the solutions. So this to me would be some of what I would see as needing additional thoughts in terms of how we can do better. But if we have to have greater impact, strategic partnerships are a must-have. Not everything can be resolved by one organization. Not everything can be addressed by international organizations alone. We need to make sure that we are partnering with institutions on the ground and different partners as well, local partners, to make sure that our outreach is really far and wide, making it more inclusive if we are to meet our commitment on the SDGs.
I'm going to ask you to give a specific example of this more that you feel needs to be done, and if particularly also within your work at the ITC, do you have a specific project in mind where you're seeing this sort of web of different stakeholders coming together, trying to shift things so that you don't have a one-size-fits-all approach?
I think just in terms of our approach is one that focuses on ensuring that we have a broad stakeholder group that we are consulting on. So you are co-creating with the respective beneficiary stakeholders, because it should be that way. Unless something is conceptualized with those that are affected, you are likely to perhaps get it slightly wrong if you do it on your own. So our approach is one that has that fundamental aspect to it. We make sure that whatever intervention we apply is one that is aligned with the National Development Plan or any of the other strategic aspects or documentation that has been approved at the highest political level. We also ensure that as part of this process, we have clarity within the development of the intervention as to how we would address the sustainability aspects. So ensuring that as part of the team, we have local staff being an integral part of that implementation, but also ensuring that much of this lies very much in the business support organizations that at the country level, because once we step aside, these would be some of the institutions that take it forward. But we also, alongside that, we make sure that we are working with some of the international expertise that we have to build the capacity to a level that they can actually be able to take this forward on their own. And this is what we apply across the board. If a project is coming for consideration by senior management, we actually ensure that all these elements are actually put in place. We have a way of measuring all that so that we can monitor the progression of that.
As we wrap up, unfortunately, we have so much to talk about, but as we wrap up, I'm curious to know, who is Dorothy outside the ITC? What does she like to do besides finding out that we happen to like the same gospel musician from Zambia, Pompi? What does Dorothy enjoy doing?
Dorothy remains very simple. She is a mother of two and recently became a grandmother. So that is my priority. I try to spend as much quality time with my family as I can when, the opportunity arises. Of course, my work takes me to many places, but when I have that dedicated time, I do that. I also try to make sure that I'm keeping it going with my friends at the country level and many other levels that I have. I just love being out there, engaging with everyone. I love to cook. I love to bake in particular when the time allows me. But I also like actively participating in activities when I'm home that involve empowerment of women. I do have a circle of friends that have come together and are supporting women in disadvantaged communities to try and see how we can bring them up. So that's me. Very simple. A bit of holiday sightseeing also comes into play, but not much of that.
Yeah. And if I may ask, what kind of support are you giving to these women, to uplift them?
One specific project that we are working on recently is this is made by a Zambian who actually was a beneficiary of our SheTrades program. But she has grown herself through the different training sessions that we have. She has been able not only to improve on the quality of what she can make, to also access better markets, but doing this increasingly more in a sustainable way. So linked to that, what she has decided to do outside the formal structure of her business was to get 20 women from one of the communities back home whom we try to help by bringing all these women together to take used fabrics and to make new fabric out of it, for lack of a better term. And then what she does is buy this from them and then make articles out of this, and all that will go back to the women. So we put together a bit of resources to just kickstart that process and make sure that we are supporting. Of course, I'm not on the ground all the time, but I try to help as much as I can when I'm home. 20 of them in one place where we are paying a little bit of financing for the place that they're using, and that's what we're doing. It's a small way, but I do hope that we can grow this. It gives you fulfillment, I think, that you try to give back in one way or another. And once I'm retired, my idea is to go back home and draw on the numerous experience I've gathered over the years to contribute to my country in a very informal way, not in the formal structures, because I think I'll be too advanced in age for that. The idea is that I also try to give an opportunity to a government, to a country that gave me the opportunity to come this far.
You've actually already touched more or less on the closing question, which was, what is next for you? And you're talking about taking back your skills and your knowledge, not necessarily within the formal structures, but in the informal. What is the pull for the informal? Why are you drawn to that?
Actually, when I say informal, it's not so much me doing a business per se, but more plowing back by working with different groups, particularly of women. By plowing back, if my own country desires that I give views on particular issues, that I can do that, whatever will come up. I'm still reflecting on specifically what that would be, but these are some of the things that I see doing beyond hanging my gloves from the Geneva constituency. I certainly must say this journey has been one that I really, really appreciate. It's one that has opened my eyes to different perspectives, but it's also one that has not been easy. It has been challenging, but there's a lot of fulfillment as well. Working with businesses who come sometimes from nothing to building themselves and being able to actually make that connection in markets, and you see them grow, is so fulfilling. But what's even more is what's behind that. If it's a single business person, they employ how many people? How many of those people can be confident that they have an income that is guaranteed, that can help them make decisions about their own families, their own investment, many, many things, and contribute in many different ways. I think sometimes, which is good, we might have to think big. It's about big businesses, but sometimes it's also resources at a very reduced level that can help. It doesn't have to be that all solutions need big money. I have been in instances where 40,000 is provided to an agency that works on meeting standard requirements in Arusha. That 40,000 was one that was used to translate the documentation that we had prepared. It was used to organize 500 farmers, small-scale farmers, and the only requirement, they had to have a bit of land. Then there were 3 young men that came out of university who had a fairly old Land Rover, which they were using. They would go around to pick green beans from these women mostly. Consolidation of that, using a container modified to have refrigeration facilities. Once they had graded, packed, they would send this off to the European Union. What was remaining was offloaded onto the local market. I spent over 2 hours just talking to them to get a sense from them. How do you feel? Everybody's just saying empowered. Empowered. I can make my own decisions. You see that little shop? That's my reinvestment from what I'm getting here. Different things. But it's just the joy that everybody has to feel they are part of community, that everybody is thinking about them, and that there are people that can help them achieve their dreams.
Excellent. And on that note of community, it just reminds me of the point at which we started when you were talking about the sense of community within your own family, within your own big family that you grew up in, and how that sort of was already ingrained in you, and how you've managed to recreate that also in the work that you do. Dorothy, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you and getting to know you. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thank you to everyone who has watched till the end. We will be back with another edition of the Geneva Trade Insights, and you can follow us on Geneva Trade platform on our YouTube channel, or you can also find us on Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn. Thank you very much, and see you next time.